안녕하세요, 여러분. This is Jesse from Chosun Yonghwa Review here, and welcome to another movie review. This time, we're taking a look at a very obscure and one of the first North Korean movies ever made, Sonyeon Baljin-san, aka Boy Partisans, directed by Yoon Young-gyu, was a film made and released in 1951, right in the middle of the Korean War. The film opens up with the logo of the Korea State Film Studio, an early forerunner to the modern Korea Film Studio. It's interesting to note here that the title cards in the opening are written in Hanja, not Hangul, Hanja being Korean written with Chinese characters, which is certainly unusual for the time period. We are then given an exposition dump in the form of title cards that tell us about the United States' advance into North Korea, occupying various towns and villages. The scene finally shifts to our three child protagonists who discuss what to do with the impending arrival of US forces to their village. Without any thought or discussion whatsoever, one of them immediately decides that they will stay there and become guerrillas, just before a US air raid drops napalm on their village. The kids emerge from their hiding place to see the village aflame and reaffirm their pledge to become child soldiers, and then proceed to go tell their teacher about it. Their teacher, who is only referred to by his name, Park, vouches for the boys in front of the secretary of the Workers' Party. The secretary agrees and entrusts the proper guidance of the boys to the teacher Park before leaving to answer the phone. What's interesting in this scene is that you can see a picture of Joseph Stalin in the background. Portraits of early Soviet figures such as Lenin and Stalin were a common sight early in North Korea's history, up until the late 1950s when the DPRK sought to distance itself from the idea of being another Soviet satellite state. Afterwards, we see the leader of the boys, Choi Yong-Chan, walking with a girl named Moon Ying-sun, before meeting his brother Young-gil, who is in the army. Yong-Chan's father asks his son why the army is retreating. Young-gil replies that it is only a temporary, strategic retreat, and that they will be back soon. He entrusts Young-chan with keeping the village safe until they return, and promises them all that he will return, and then sets out. I just want to point out that it's very difficult to determine exactly who is who in this movie. As you saw before, the title cards are in Hanja, which I cannot reliably read, in fact most Koreans can't, and the movie is dubbed in Mandarin as well. Couple that with the fact that there is literally no information on this movie available on the internet, I'm going to have to resort to educated guesses on occasion, and for that I apologize. As the soldiers march away, the scene shifts to the arrival of US troops on what are actual Willys Jeeps. Perhaps these were captured from the ROK, or they were hand-me-downs from the Soviets that they received per Lend-Lease during World War II. We then get to see the evil US commander, who looks like a caricature of anti-Semitic propaganda by the enlarged nose, hunched back, and dark curly hair. Seriously, they couldn't have possibly exaggerated his features any further. It's almost laughable were it not a caricature of Nazi stereotypes, of which, by the way, the North Koreans were indeed inspired by, but we'll get to that in the analysis. Once situated in the village, they recruit the services of Kang Tae-sik, a former collaborator with the Japanese, who had his own rice farm. Tae-sik agrees to help rat out suspected communists to US forces in exchange for money and land. As Tae-sik leaves, the US commander orders the 150 captured communists to be executed later that night. We are then shown the Americans ransacking the town, catcalling Young-chan's mother, who narrowly avoids being raped by two US soldiers. While walking with Young-chan, the two are stopped by Tae-sik and other collaborators who detain her after refusing to tell them where her son and the rest of the army went. We also see two American servicemen harass a Korean woman with her child. One of the Americans rips the baby from her arms, and the other shoots her point blank after she spits on him for trying to kiss her. Later that night, U.S. forces cut down the suspected communists with an M1917 Browning machine gun, while stragglers are picked off by eager U.S. soldiers with M1 carbines and 1911 pistols. I must say that the murky cinematography does a really good job of portraying the brutality and sheer evil of the US forces in the movie. The pitch-black background pierced only by the white glimmer of teeth by smiling US servicemen as they shoot with impunity unarmed civilians is very powerful imagery. The following morning, Commander Poisonous Mushroom holds a town hall where he tells the village that US forces have come on behalf of Douglas MacArthur. He tells the village that they will all be free like in America so long as they obey his orders, and that if they confess to their guilt of being communists, they will be given land and money. US troops post their list of laws in the town square, which the two boys deface by writing, "The Americans are murderers and liars" over it, their first act of defiance. Yong-Chan and his mother are brought in for interrogation. Tae-sik and one of the US officers ask one more time where Young-gil is. When his mother reiterates that she knows nothing, Tae-sik and the NCO laugh and bring in a battered and tortured Young-gil. Young-gil's mother is appalled at what was done to her son and cries out to him. Young-gil, however, tells her not to worry, that no matter how much they torture him, he will say nothing, saying that his only regret is that he will never get to see the day where the Americans are defeated once and for all. The NCO, having heard enough, orders Young-gil out of the room. The mother, now in an uncontrolled rage, lambasts the Americans, as well as Lee Seung-man, the dictator of South Korea, as evil murderers and vowed that Korea will kill every last one of them, along with people like Tae-sik for collaborating with the enemy. The NCO, once more having heard enough, draws his pistol and shoots her dead, all in front of young Yong-chan.
Mama! Mama!
A stunned Young-chan walks aimlessly towards a field where US Army soldiers are staying. He sits down and remembers the days before the war, when the children would parade with pictures of Kim Il-sung and Joseph Stalin. Or when the village organized talent shows with kids before they all gathered to sing patriotic songs with his mother watching, smiling. Young-chan, unable to deal with the grief, he uses it to embolden himself to continue fighting the US in honor of his mother. The following night, the group of kids unanimously elect Young-chan as their leader. Young-chan says that the first step in their plan is to befriend someone in the US chain of command to earn their trust. One of the boys, Shin Khan, offers to form a group to clean up around the village for them, to which Young-chan agrees. Shin Khan forms the cleaning group and shows a few NCOs what he's doing and promptly earns their trust. That same night, the gang cuts the phone lines to the US headquarters in the village. The next day, the boy smugly observes the US troops attempting to fix the lines who mistake his smile for curiosity. They repair the lines and the following night place 2 guards near the phone lines who will shoot anyone without a password. Unbeknownst to the US, however, the girl that they hired to be the switchboard operator is Moon Ying-sun, the same girl that Young-chan was friends with earlier, who promptly relays the boys the password. The boys use the password to get by the guards and proceed to cut the lines again and disperse leaflets around town. These acts of rebellion begin to spread among the villagers, much to the ire of Commander Kristallnacht, who orders the police chief to deal with the communist guerrillas or be executed. The police chief then goes to interrogate Tae-sik on why he hasn't stopped the communists and accuses him of harboring them. Tae-sik vehemently denies this and suggests the chief arrest the families of suspected communists as well, a suggestion the chief obliges to. Taesik and the police waste little time in rounding up scores of family members of suspected communists, executing as many as 40 before locking the rest away in a barn. Taesik then parties with the rest of his team before walking home intoxicated. On his way home, however, the boys intercept the drunk man and kill him, leaving a leaflet on his corpse saying, "This is what happens to all who betray their homeland and serve the Americans." And that same night, another group of kids ambushes an army truck that's carrying some of the prisoners from before. It's also a truck that's driving in the night without its lights on for some reason. In the ensuing ambush, they kill the drivers and rescue the prisoners in the back of the truck and rush them into the mountains. In the hills, the boys meet up with their teacher Park, who tells them all about how much the guerrillas have benefited from the actions in the village. He thanks them and informs them that the People's Army has destroyed 6 enemy divisions and is closing in on the village. Whether he means the Korean People's Army or the People's Liberation Army of China is unknown. He tells the boys that his group needs guns and ammo, and the boys tell him that there's a huge stockpile of them at the HQ and offer to get it for him. The boys sneak in covertly and take 2 chests of guns and ammo. However, Sin Khan from before, who organized the street sweeping gang, is caught and attempts to run away, but is shot and carried away before he can do so. Sin Khan is tortured mercilessly by the police chief, who tells him in a brief respite from torture that if he gives up his friends, he'll be free to go. When the boy still refuses to say a word, he gives him one last chance to confess to an American NCO. Sin Khan confesses to stealing guns to kill the Americans. He tells them to take his hands off Korea and that he won't leave the village alive. Realizing the boy can't be persuaded to talk, the chief ties him to a tree outside, and Sin Khan is executed by a firing squad. The following day, Yong-Chan and his squad are distraught by Sin Khan's death and lament that they couldn't save him. Yong-Chan tells him to keep their spirits up as the KPA and PLA are less than 100 kilometers away from the village. With victory near, they begin to plan their assault to retake the village with the guerrillas. Back at the US HQ, Commander Gru from Despicable Me is informed by command that he must pack up and leave the village by 10 p.m., as they are surrounded on 3 sides. The commander balks at why they waited so long to tell him and is informed that all of their radio equipment was destroyed by Moon Ying-sun, who slipped out the night before. The commander proceeds to evacuate, but not before ordering the execution of the remaining prisoners locked away in the barn. He makes his way onto a Willys Jeep and heads out into the night when his Jeep is hit by an IED placed by the guerrillas, killing him instantly. The guerrillas then detonate the only bridge, letting them escape to the south, trapping the soldiers in the village. The remaining troops, now under the jurisdiction of the police chief, quickly order the civilians out of the barn where a firing squad awaits. Right as they are about to fire, shots ring out, striking the 2 operators of the M1919. The guerrillas have come just in time to save the civilians, quickly killing all of the Americans except for the police chief, whom the kids promptly execute in front of everyone. Yong-Chan's brother Yong-Gil, who returned like he promised, then informs everyone that the KPA and Chinese volunteers, God, if I was a Chinese-Korean war veteran, I'd be pretty pissed at that, have completely routed the US Army and have assumed the offensive and will not stop until the enemy has left Korea. The film then switches to some stock footage of the People's Liberation Army advance into Korea before transitioning to the City Hall, where under the stout portraits of Joseph Stalin, Kim Il-sung, and Mao Zedong, the party secretary congratulates Yong-Chan, Moon Ying-sun, and another boy who I can't name unfortunately, for their hard work and dedication to the Workers' Party and the country, saying that while they were good at war, it is now time to study, as ordered by Kim Il-sung himself. Yong-Chan steps up, standing in front of a portrait of Lenin. He thanks the party for, I don't know, inspiring him to become a child soldier, I guess? And the film closes with a patriotic song sung by children in Mandarin Chinese. Well, this movie was really interesting. It's very rare we get to see footage from this early of a point in North Korea's life. Never mind a film made during the actual war itself. While there are at least 2 other films known to have been made during the war, as far as I can tell, this is the only one available to us Westerners. What's so great about having this film is that it shows just how much influence from the Soviets and later the Chinese there was in the country at the time. Portraits of Lenin, Stalin, and Mao Zedong are prominently featured alongside Kim Il-sung throughout the film, something that would be omitted not soon after the war as the DPRK sought to forge its own identity for itself, creating the myth that Kim Il-sung himself liberated Korea, while downplaying or in some cases outright denying the help from the Soviets and to a lesser extent the Chinese. I think it is worth noting that this movie was probably filmed in Manchuria due to the fact that there wasn't very much territory the DPR controlled for any length of time by 1951. They were losing ground steadily by this point, making a process like filmmaking virtually impossible within the country. On top of that, all of the title cards, subtitles, and lyrics are in Chinese. Hell, even the characters are dubbed over in Mandarin, which is what made identifying characters so difficult. So, we can infer that either this is a Chinese dubbing of the original North Korean version, or that this is the only version out there, since it's very likely that it was filmed in China given the time frame in which the movie was made. I'm not aware if there is a North Korean version of this film that exists, and given how little information there is about this movie, I don't think we'll ever know. As for the movie itself, it's more or less North Korea's Red Dawn. Or, perhaps more appropriately, Red Dawn is America's Boy Partisans. You decide. Anyways, the film itself, while interesting from a historical perspective, is pretty hit or miss in every other category. The acting skills of the main characters are really subpar, even for North Korean standards, and this is most evident when we are first introduced to them. When deciding what to do with the incoming Americans, there is literally no discussion about what to do. Yong-Chan literally just says, "We're going to stay behind," and the other 2 blindly agree without any sort of recourse or discussion. There isn't even any emotion when delivering the lines. It's very much like they're just reading cue cards. Yes, I'm aware the film is dubbed, but even just judging their body language and by reading their lips, you can tell that the North Korean version, if there is one, isn't much different. Very stiff, very emotionless, and not very well delivered. Even the scenes that are supposed to be sad, or at least provoke some sort of response from the audience, don't. Like the scene where Yong-Chan's mother is shot right in front of him. In the next scene where he's walking to the field, he doesn't even shed one tear. He just sits down, has a flashback, puts his head into his hands for literally 2 seconds, then vows to kill the Americans. It's like he doesn't even care that his mom was just murdered in front of him not 10 minutes before. If he doesn't care, why should the audience? Shin Khan's actor was better, but held back by the fact that his character doesn't get many lines. His scene where he's tortured and eventually executed gives his character the chance to really shine, but instead he just delivered a dubbed, predictable, "You'll never get anything out of me, long live Kim Il-sung" speech before he's executed. The only one of the kids who shows any signs of good acting are Moon Ying-sun, but she only gets maybe 5 lines in the entire movie, so there's more wasted potential. As for our bad guys, Kang Tae-sik is the embodiment of all the Koreans who chose to collaborate with the US forces and is depicted as an opportunistic, selfish traitor who would sell his own mother if it meant getting money. The Americans are depicted in possibly the most offensive, exaggerated, racist way possible. They are also shown as being remorseless child killers and rapists who smile and laugh while mowing down scores of innocents. The US commander, whose actual name I couldn't figure out, looks like he could be the final boss of the National Alliance game Ethnic Cleansing. Seriously, his appearance is exactly that of the caricatures the Germans would make of Jews during the Third Reich. And no, that's not a coincidence. North Korea has always held vehemently anti-Semitic views towards Jews and the State of Israel, which they probably got from the Soviets, who weren't the biggest fans of Jews either. The North Korean government tends to view Jews much in the same way that the Germans did, as the shadowy masterminds controlling the world's banks in an attempt to steal all of the world's wealth. The only difference is that the North Koreans stopped short of subscribing to the idea of Judeo-Bolshevism, as that would contradict their own ideology, being communists themselves. That said, it is interesting to see one of the earlier North Korean films placing the most, albeit subliminal, emphasis on this commonly overlooked fact about North Korean ideology. As far as historical accuracy is concerned, the film is partly accurate. Now allow me to clarify, I am an American. Both of my grandfathers served in the Korean War. And while most of the war crimes that are being committed by the US forces in this film are either over-exaggerated or blatantly false, to say that the US didn't commit any war crimes at all would be blatantly false as well on my part. There are isolated cases of US soldiers committing war crimes like rape and executing civilians. This happened to every country that was involved. However, this film implies that the Americans did this to every town they occupied and that they were sanctioned by higher-ups in the chain of command, which is blatantly untrue. As I mentioned before, most war crimes are isolated incidents. So in short, yes, the US committed war crimes, but the manner in which this film shows them being conducted is false. Besides, the entire point of this film is about glorifying child soldiers, which in of itself is a huge war crime, so North Korea isn't exactly clean here either. One other little fact that I want to point out is that this film is, once again, very accurate with the firearms that it chooses to use. The Americans are all shown using actual American weapons. There are M1 carbines, however you want to say it, M1 Garands, Thompson machine guns. There's Browning M1917s, M1919s. Even the reserves are shown using M1903 Springfield rifles, which is a great attention to detail, whereas the communists are seen mostly using PPSH-41s. I am loving how North Korea actually pays attention to firearms. As a gun person, I love that. Just throwing that out there. As far as the war itself is portrayed in this film, while it is true that the US and its allies lost much of the territory it had gained in North Korea, not all mind you, South Korea gained more territory than it had before the war started, the North Koreans portray their initial retreat as a strategic retreat, when in reality it was because the KPA was encircled and utterly annihilated after MacArthur's landing at Incheon. Another inaccuracy that kind of annoys me, and I feel like would really annoy me even more if I was Chinese, is how the film asserts that it was the KPA who pushed the US out of North Korea and that the Chinese were just volunteers that helped. This is completely untrue and in fact was the complete opposite. The People's Liberation Army did 90% of the fighting in the last 2 years of war, losing over 1 million men in the process, mostly to artillery. With the KPA being mostly used as reserves or guarding the flanks of the main Chinese army, there would literally be no North Korea today without the Chinese. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, I'll leave for you to decide. But the fact remains that the Chinese did much of the heavy lifting, and to downplay their role as volunteers, I think is really disrespectful, even as an American. The Chinese fought hard, they deserve more credit than you give them, North Korea. What I will decide for you, however, is whether or not you should watch this movie, which you should. So go watch it now, you imperialist rats! And while you're at it, have a great day.